Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of For the Love of Marketing. Today we're going to be talking about all things PR. So thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done already. But in the meantime, we're going to get cracking, and I'm really excited to welcome this week Devon. Devon is the founder of Siegel Associates, who are a fantastic, and I can absolutely stand by that, fantastic full-service PR and social media company based out of New Jersey, Devon, right?
That is correct.
Good old New Jersey, lovely part of the world, and also executive director of Garden State Wine Company as well, Wine Association, sorry, I should say, which is it's got to be a good thing, right? So we're going to talk about all things PR today. Now, I think for me, Devon, PR has been, in the last 25 years, always there, always part of what I'm doing, but it's such a mysterious, dark art, right? It's one of those things like it's a bit like SEO, very, very different, but also it's one of these worlds you need to engross yourself in. You really need to understand there's a lot of things you can do really well, there's a lot of things you can do really badly within PR, right? So as our resident expert on PR today, let's just kick off with the first opening question, right? What is PR, right? I mean, it sounds like a silly question to ask, but there's a lot around what is PR from SEO, from social media. It's changed so much over the years. So what do you think PR is today?
Public relations is a fascinating combination of both traditional elements and new technology or digital elements peppered in. I think public relations requires attention to the way that others perceive your brand or your message, and ensuring that the messenger is adept at crafting the communications wherever they're being distributed in a way that eliminates ambiguity. I also see public relations as many times a proactive effort. Although what we specialize in at Siegel Associates is also crisis marketing and crisis public relations. And so using the M word in there, public relations, as we traditionally are taught in the classroom, is a pillar of sort of that overall marketing mix. And you're ensuring that your internal messaging is what it needs to be, and that the public can see you as the way that you would intend on them seeing you. So that could be just general branding, communications, as well as sticky wickets or, pickles, if you will. I don't know. I tried the sticky wicket, but so I love public relations as it has been traditionally communicated in the classroom. But I'm also a very big fan of the way social media and digital platforms have absolutely turned the industry, I think, on its head in a lot of good ways.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that's happened when you think about the way digital marketing's evolved over the last 20 years or so, and PR in line with it. I mean, a couple of those that spring to mind for me are the use of Twitter to position yourself as an authority in a space where journalists are looking for interesting authorities on a specific subject, and how they find you might find if you build relationships with a journalist and you put a good flow of content out in a niche, you can get yourself PR opportunities that you might otherwise have had to spend months or even years trying to build up. I mean, what do you think about that? What do you think about how marketers could maybe use social media to maybe build relationships with journalists or get good content out there to be found by them?
Well, when it comes to the methodology we used to use, decades ago, it involved getting a phone number and then an email address for the person that you're trying to pitch to, looking at the bylines in publications, which were all print, determining what the editorial calendars were, and getting access to the actual people, whether we're talking about producers or editors. Twitter and other social media platforms, but I think Twitter is known for the magic of, this individual is a subject matter expert and they're planting a seed out there for the right avenue to cultivate. I think some people on the message creation side, so in the press, they're seeking all the time industry experts to round out stories and understand different perspectives. And so if you're unable to locate the phone number, if you're unable to locate the email address, or quite frankly, if the people that you're trying to communicate with are, have inboxes that probably look like ours, you can get lost. Your message can get lost in someone's inbox without intention to ignore the messenger. So Twitter is an active, immediate way for an individual to say, here's what I'm working on right now. Here's how I can help with your story. You can specifically tag journalists as well. And many journalists are managing their own presence on social media, unlike brands that may hire or outsource to an agency like ours. Journalists are behind the scenes, behind the camera, and behind the tweet. Excellent. So I think it's a really good way for businesses and individuals of varying degrees in their careers, or their varying industries, to reach out to the right journalists across all fields. So I think it's a wonderful new avenue.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful. I think both in terms of reaching out to journalists and sort of baiting those journalists into you as well. I think it's great social media. I think sometimes people think, okay, look, we don't want to be on Twitter because it's a bit of an echo chamber and it's just people shouting at each other. And yeah, okay, it might be less maybe engaging or authentic than some other places like LinkedIn or Instagram perhaps, but it has its other benefits. And I certainly think PR is one of those. One of the other big trends that crosses over digital marketing and PR, of course, is digital PR, right? And whatever that means, right? And yeah, I think there's been a bit of I personally think a bit of a negative trend in the last couple of years for people to go out there and charge companies X amount of money to do digital PR, right? For link building purposes, primarily to help with SEO. And when really all they're doing is whacking it out on some online service for like £5, or sticking it out on the wire and getting it covered in Yahoo Finance once a month or something like that. It's not really PR, right? It's a very simple service giving PR a bit of a bad name, maybe generating a couple of links, but not really doing the good work of PR. I would imagine you've got an opinion on that.
I certainly do.
Tell me your opinion.
So some of the clients that we've adopted came from agencies that utilize some of the tactics that you're describing. And a couple of the pitfalls include, as a client, if you're not aware of what that is, of what this kind of cloak and dagger approach to public relations is, you may feel like you're getting what you're paying for, because let's say a story came out on X or a story came out on Y, and you can then present it in your metrics to your supervisor, or as the CEO, you might not have time to dig deeper than just seeing, okay, title of article and link, just like many consumers do when we also consume the media that you're describing, this Yahoo Finance concept. But what ends up happening is, if you look all the way down the value chain in whatever it is that you're shooting for in your industry, and you're trying to sort of set the stage for a certain geography, a certain target audience, certain readability. And what I mean by that is, if you're targeting some of these news outlets that are just responding to the press releases pumped out on the wire, you may not be reading, you may be completely missing the target, the geo demo target. So even though you could check the box of we got coverage, it may not be the right coverage for your audience. And in that sense, I think what you said is accurate, where those dollars are basically singed. You just burnt a whole pile of Scrooge McDuck money in the plexiglass, and everyone could watch. It is not. It's not a practice that Siegel Associates believes in. We love the service called Haro, Help a Reporter Out, HARO.
Yeah.
So, we do subscribe to that, and we get notes from actual journalists compiled in a digest every morning and every evening. I think other agencies maybe have it less frequently, but we have people on our team looking for specific writers, basically sending out an APB or an all points bulletin, like, can somebody help me out? And as an agency that believes in, giving as you grow, in a way, this falls right into the tenets of Siegel Associates, which is, we're not just, looking to ask somebody to complete a task on behalf of us or our client. We're looking to actually help with the value chain of public information to make sure that we provide viable information from real experts, who we've not only vetted, but who we have built relationships with. So I see help a reporter out more as a relationship building strategy versus, pushing things out on the wire, which can sometimes lead to, not hitting the right mark.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. Harry's great. I think it's a service we subscribe to as well. So yeah, I know it well. It's very good. So you mentioned crisis management earlier, and I know that's a real area of specialism for Siegel. I mean, in my career, I've certainly had to deal with a few crises. Often the fault of the leadership team who've stepped out into a public arena and said or done something they shouldn't have done, or been caught saying or doing something they shouldn't have been caught doing, often the way, and you have to come back from that. Or there's been your campaign you're running where you've got a celebrity involved and they've made a mistake and you're out of your control and you have to mop up that mess, or there's been a regulatory error or something like that. There's been a few of those I've seen in places I've worked over the years, which we've had to do crisis management of. And I'm sure there'll be people listening who have had to, or at some point in their careers will have to, if they haven't already, deal with a crisis. So proactive PR is the bit we all think about when we think of PR. Let's warm up some journalists, let's take them out for lunch, let's write some exciting stories and get some great coverage in some lovely places. Yep. Crisis management, not so much fun, but arguably more important. So let's say a crisis hits a company. What's the process? Where do you go? What do you do?
Mm-hmm. So in the beginning of my career, I was hired by the American Red Cross. And in the role that I had, it was electronic marketing. So it was really building many of the platforms and the brand presence for the Southeastern Pennsylvania chapter, which covers Philadelphia. And little did we know, it was right before Hurricane Katrina hit. So one of my first experiences with crisis embedded or in-house, was watching our organization, which responds to disasters, that is our mission, respond not only to the disaster at hand, but also handle some of the crises that were popping up from a communications perspective. So one of the things that I did in-house was I reached out to the CEO of our organization immediately upon identifying whatever the crisis was. I proposed a solution, I got his buy-in, and then I requested access and permission to reach out to other stakeholders, not only in the press, but in other companies that were partnered with us or were about to be partnered with us. So after receiving that permission, I then coordinated just traditional, project management with a couple of stakeholders, brought them together, and then the dirtying of the hands, if you will, in the actual messaging and the delivery of the message. I was sort of a more junior person at the time, so my role was really to facilitate the soup to nuts execution of, solving this crisis so that the public was well aware of, who we were, where we stood, and what the solution was. And it was a project that we, to this day, have a remnants of, where we had a lot of tech entrepreneurs who were creating websites at the time, trying to help people who were missing, looking for their loved ones. And the solution was to connect Google with the American Red Cross's database so that Google, the leader on search, could then help people missing their loved ones by overlaying their technology with our database. And then it was letting the public know about it in partnership with Comcast, and we created Katrina On Demand so that people could see real time what was happening in the affected areas. At the time, digital was not as big of a factor, but if you were to look at, the nature of your question, it's, where do you start? How do you tackle sort of that project? And really, when do you see it as complete? Because it's curious. Sometimes with crisis, you're responding to and fielding more of the press than you are with proactive public relations, where you're pushing out and you're hoping that you're baiting your hook with the right bit of information. Your opener email is just enticing enough, as well as your subject line. But when it comes to responsive or crisis public relations, you traditionally, you will have a lot of people coming to you for follow-up quotes and for interviews with your clients. So pulling a little bit away from the Red Cross example and going into more of an, kind of giving my clients the same type of privacy that patients have with their doctors, I can speak in broad strokes about, how you would do it not in-house. So that first example would have been, you talk to your leadership team. It doesn't matter who you are at the company. If you identify a crisis, I had a boss many years ago who said, I just want to know as soon as you know that there's an issue or that there's a possibility of an issue, because then we can pull our wagons together and handle it as a team. Insulating a company or your leadership team from something because you have fears about the backlash for yourself, for your career progression, for whoever's involved, that's very human. But also very human is bringing a village together in order to tackle whatever it is that you need to tackle. So whether the people watching your program are in-house, or if you're coming at it as an agency, it's the same issue that people have. So you're handling an account and you see down the pike that there is the possibility of something, let's say, bubbling up on social media as a result of a quote, a hot mic, an impropriety, an illegal activity. And you're one of the first people aware of whatever the list is that is probably infinite in terms of what could go wrong. We recommend in advance of signing with a client, I like in advance of signing with a client, when there's a prospective client, I put a lot more time into thinking about the rabbit holes. So what are the possible rabbit holes that they're not anticipating for two reasons, and really good reasons. One is you don't want to think about the negative when you're building or envisioning something that's beautiful and new, whether it's a product or service. So a lot of our clients, they may have been made aware of a potential issue, but they're probably really sharply focusing on how do we increase revenue? How do we increase traffic?
Yeah.
How do we build followers? And do you have a private account? Do you have a public account? When do you make it a business account? Like all of that. So when you're working in the sectors that you are an expert, when you're talking to startups, particularly in the tech sector, a lot of what we do is pre-think before the client signs. And then when you go through that getting to know you process, it's not just about developing what's called a boilerplate, the basic description of your client's company. It's not just about having the social handles correct and someone proving that 1,100 times, but it's also about making sure that your crisis response is genuine and human. So it doesn't sound canned when at 2 a.m, the news about whatever said crisis is hits and your C-suite is asleep and the decision makers or the approval process breakdown within your client's in-house team doesn't exist because wherever they live in the world, lights are off. So your company's lights are always on when you're handling a crisis. It's very important to have those responses in queue so that the approvals have come well before the crisis has hit. And I also view a part of what our role is as being like the Jiminy Crickets of our clients. So we're well behind the person who's in front of the microphone. We're not speaking on behalf of the client. We're helping them speak on behalf of themselves and tell their own stories. As a listener, which I think you and I have been for the majority of our careers, absolutely, and maybe even prior to that, stepping into communications and marketing, as a listener to people that we have personal relationships with, as well as professional relationships, when someone is being forthright, and when you can trust somebody's words because you can hear in them that they're not as choreographed. And this isn't to say that there isn't thoughtfulness behind the words that we help our clients with. It's more so that once they have the microphone, they are speaking from here. It doesn't have to be this huge document, whether they're explaining, apologizing, providing the solution for. Sometimes the public just wants to hear, we are mortified that X, Y, and Z happened. We are attentive and diligent when it comes to the response, and we will do everything that we possibly can do in order to help those impacted by the situation, right? The
Yeah.
company has to be all of that, regardless of what the crisis is. So it's odd to say this, but you are championing the honest story so
Yeah.
that your client feels good telling it. And that is across digital platforms. It's on their LinkedIn pages. It's in coffee shops when they walk in coffee shops, so that they know that they can stand firmly here. And even though Siegel Associates isn't behind them in that, career builder commercial that I love, where everyone's following you on your way to your interview, but we are there in every sense of the term, because we prepared you for that moment.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a great point. I think you're being able to give people the freedom to talk humanly, but within a framework that they've been guided. Here's the road, but walk it your own way. I think that's important. People want to hear a voice. They don't want to hear clearly scripted pieces. They don't want. I mean, a robot can just read that out. They don't want to hear cliches and catchphrases. They want a real person talking to them. And it's funny when you were thinking about that, I was equating it to relationships, and how they talk about how sometimes people just want to hear, I hear you, I understand, I listen, not this is exactly what the solution must be. And it's very, very similar in that respect. One thing, just to finish up, one thing you mentioned earlier on, which I think you've talked around a little bit during the chat as well, which has been, I think, fantastic, was you mentioned the word crafting, right? And I think that's really important, right? Communication is such a critical area, and telling a story is really it's what most of marketing and a lot of life is about, to be honest with you, but especially within PR. I mean, if you were to just think of 2 or 3 just really, really short snippet tips on what makes a good story, what should you do or what shouldn't you do, maybe when thinking about how to put whatever your story is, whatever your press release is out, are there 2 or 3 things maybe you could give us as a do this and don't do that?
Mm-hmm. So I think step 1 is remember why you started, and telling the story of why you started with this same twinkle in your eye that existed when you actually started your venture. So being in an environment that feels comfortable when you're telling your story, not looking at a blank piece of paper or a blank screen to try to write it out, but really to talk it through, whether it's with your in-house team, your support system at home, if you have to do this yourself, and having someone else write or record your story as you tell it. If you get, stage fright, so to speak, with recording, I think, having someone else write it out can be very helpful. And then listening to your story told back to you before you even think about the public part of public relations. So start to craft, not only what it feels like to share, but also what it sounds like to receive your story back. And looking at the words that you use with a very deliberate eye, because when you think about, even the 2 of us, because we've been professional friends for a little bit of time now, I'm very aware that when I say certain things, that they might mean something different to you as they do to me. I'm delivering the message with intent, and I know what I'm trying to say. You're listening to the message clearly, but your life experience, your culture, whatever it is, we have to be conscientious of that as we just tell the beginnings of our story to the public, because the public hears with whatever ears they have in the moment where they're receiving your message. This is a huge challenge. So even when developing, going into the second part of the question, which is like 3 tips or so, 3 to 5 tips, your boilerplate, which we mentioned earlier, this is the sort of very succinct version of who you are as a company or an individual, because as an author, as you are, that telling the story of who you are and why you selected just these few sentences for whatever the media outlet is that asked for your bio and your headshot, and right, what that looks like needs to be very tight, and every word needs to be deliberate. I also think that the next positive step to take is really to look at the calendar. There are things in the calendar that are seasonal for every industry. There are things on the calendar that are traditional for certain industries. So making sure that you're very careful in selecting what you add to the calendar and very careful about what you focus on. So you might say to yourself, okay, well, our anniversary is something that we want to make sure we address or share every year, but is that news? And so from a PR perspective, we oftentimes share with our clients, something might seem so important to you. It might seem so important to your staff. And there's a way to handle that with, just like the intranet is different from the internet. We've got things that are meant just for your in-house folks, because they're the ones that are excited about the anniversary, and they're the ones that are excited about whatever the benchmark is.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. That's something I actually talk to people about all the time. As you know, in my book, I have the content bubble of the sort of what's your company, what matters to your company, what matters in your industry, and what happens in the world. And I think one thing that in my career I've just seen so many times is the CEO, especially if they're the founder of a company, is naturally very passionate about every milestone the company hits, right? We've just hired this new person who's come from this amazing company. It's the most exciting hire we've ever had. Wow, it's amazing. We've just won this award of best place to work. Oh my God, it's amazing. As CEO and founder, I'm so proud of that. Yes, you are, but no one else cares, right? And I think getting that message very carefully across, it's really important to understand as a business. Your investors may care, you will care, your staff will care. So it's an important message, but that's not going to be something that gets on the front page of the Sunday Times, right? And I think having a realistic view on that is critical.
I think you're right. And I think managing expectations is more than just the number of hits that you're going to get, or the number of times someone's going to pick up your story, or the national and international coverage that X, Y, and Z is going to get. I actually think it's more so about, there are people who really do care about X. Make sure that they know that it's happening. Make sure that when you communicate about it, that it's done with a genuine articulation in the areas where they're reading and consuming information.
That's a much nicer way of putting what I just said. Yeah.
No. I think that we're a good duo. So I also really, and I appreciate it, and I love the way you speak too. So I also want to say this, that sometimes when you're able to take on that exercise and sort of going into the next tip, you can then see your calendar fill up and remind yourself that the anniversary type of news is news to these people, identifying who those people are, what publications they read, or what channels of communication you want them to look at.
Yep.
That's important in this calendar. But the other thing that's also important is, if you narrow in kind of who your targets are for pitching different stories, you can also see that your calendar will expand throughout the year in a way that will give you a beautiful cadence, so that your story is not just all about this one anniversary. That for this group, it's going to be about innovation in your product, or this other group, it is going to be about the new person that you hired, but maybe that's the business journals, and it's going to be in the on the move section. Not everything is, to your point, front page news.
Exactly. That's amazing. Look, Devin, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, but that was, as always, a lovely chat. You know how much I love talking to you, and I'm sure we'll talk again incredibly soon. So look, thanks everyone for listening. I think there are some absolutely brilliant tips there from Devin. If you do have a crisis or you need some help with your PR, get in touch with Siegel Associates. They're absolutely fantastic. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode.